Hello and welcome to the Farm Reform Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Comstock. I'm joined by Alice Valder Curran of Hogan Lovells, our regular Washington politics correspondent, back for another episode of Policy in Focus. We're going to look at several big moves around drug pricing and MFN that happened around the end of last year and anything that has happened since, including the long-awaited launch of TrumpRx. And I'm very excited to get Alice's take on all that. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks, Jonah. Glad to be here.
So let's turn our lens backwards just a bit. The end of last year, there were finally some announcements about these CMS pilot programs that make up, I would say, the more substantive portion of this whole MFN idea, and that's the Globe and Guard models. So talk to me a little bit about just kind of the quick and dirty layman's explanation of what these are and how they work, and then we can talk a little bit about what the impact has been so far and what it looks like it's going to be.
Sure. So the short version of these models is that they seek to impose most favored nations pricing on the Medicare Part B and Part D programs. B is the Globe model and D is the Guard model. So it's really taking what the Trump administration has done in Medicaid with the generous model, trying to impose MFN pricing on Medicaid, but that's a voluntary program. Globe and Guard are mandatory for drugs that qualify, and most drugs will, and it seeks to impose MFN pricing, tying the price that Part B and Part D pay to the lowest price in a host of comparator countries for 5 years.
So I guess the big question is, when you look at those new prices and when you look at what CMS was paying before for these drugs, is it a dramatic drop? Is it about the same? Does it vary kind of drug to drug?
It certainly varies drug to drug, but the clear expectation is that it's going to lower the net effective price for a lot of drugs because they're going to tie this price to these prices in these comparator countries, which in general have much lower GDPs, much more restrictive drug access policies, and direct negotiations or price setting with manufacturers.
Now, in the past, when Medicare and Medicaid have started to talk about negotiating drug prices, paying less drug prices, there's been a ton of pushback from pharma. Is that happening in this case, or is this a situation where because the big pharmas are working so closely with the administration, they're feeling a little more comfortable about it? What are you hearing?
Well, I think we'll know for sure when the comment deadline passes. That comment deadline is Monday, February 23rd. We're not quite there yet. We expect to see the trades and manufacturers and other stakeholders submitting comments. I do expect that there'll be very strong pushback on these models for a whole bunch of different reasons. The impact on innovation, whether there's legal authority for the administration to do this through a model, and other concerns.
So, commenting is one thing, but why hasn't there been a lot of public pushback so far, or have I just missed it? I mean, groups like pharma usually get up on their podium about things like this, and I know there's been general comments about MFN, but these CMS models are flying a bit under the radar when it comes to the outside of the industry insiders.
Who knows, Jonah? There could be a million different rationales out there. But I do expect that you're going to see strong pushback in the comment letters that are submitted, because there is a real concern around the impact on innovation and the impact on funding of innovation that would happen through these models.
So you said most drugs are going to be subsumed in this. But talk to me about like Part D and Part B. How big of a payer are we talking? Does this pretty much cover all of Medicare?
I think it's certainly going to cover all of Medicare expenditures on branded innovator products. So there are some carve-outs. If you're subject to the drug price negotiation program, you're out. You do have to have a minimum spend in Medicare to be eligible. So under the Part D program, you have to have at least $69 million in spend under the program. Under the Part B program, it's $100 million. So you have to have at least that much revenue in the program to be eligible. So there could be smaller products that aren't. But I do think it's going to be impacting pretty much any innovator product. One of the ways that the administration is claiming that it's a test is that these MFN prices aren't going to apply to all utilization under these programs. It's only going to apply to the utilization of approximately 25% of the Medicare beneficiaries in those programs. And in general, the way CMS is proposing to do that is identifying zip codes, the equivalent of zip codes across the country, identify particular geographic locations based on zip codes, and those beneficiaries who are resident in those zip codes at the start of the models will have their utilization subject to the MFN pricing. And if those beneficiaries move over time, they will still stay in the model, but it's only going to be 25% of patients in general who are in Medicare whose utilization will be subject to these increased rebate obligations.
That's really interesting. So I guess this is an attempt to target the benefit here to the patients who have the most financial hardship.
Unclear exactly how they're going to pick those numbers. One of the concerns around the model is CMS's authority to do a demonstration project or a model is around testing whether there is a deficit in care or a change in a payment model that's going to address a deficit in care to help patient access, develop better quality of care. And one of the concerns across stakeholders is there's nothing indicating that you're targeting anyone based on a deficit in care. The models, if you look at the proposed rules, talk about how drug costs can impact access, but those drug costs in general are not driving access decisions, or some would say that under the models. Under the Part D model, for example, none of these rebates are going to impact any patient out of pocket obligation. Those funds are going to be paid directly to Medicare. It's not going to go to the Part D plan that's covering this drug. It's not going to address the patient's out of pocket costs whatsoever. And under Part B, there is an indication that these rebates could be used to lower the patient out of pocket obligation. But there have been some recent studies that have just come out indicating that that's really not going to drive or change patient out of pocket costs or drive changes in care much either. So there's a big question mark around these models, whether they really are effectively targeting deficits in care, quality in care through the way they're structured.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like 430B all over again, possibly, right? These things made to help the patient, but the discounts don't make it to the patient.
Yeah, that's certainly one of the concerns around the 340B program as well.
340B, thank you. I knew I had it wrong. I couldn't quite work out. So, your answer there made me realize one of the first questions I should have asked, which is, does CMS have the authority to do this? And if they don't, what's that pushback going to look like? I mean, are we looking at potential legal challenges?
Well, the last time the Trump administration and the first administration tried to do a demonstration project, there was a legal challenge and it was successful. We again can look at the comment letters that go in here to see if there are legal theories that are included there. I expect that there will be. I think industry in general thinks of this demonstration project authority as really being focused on quality of care, and testing alternative ways of delivering care, alternative ways of paying, of having Medicare pay for care to incentivize behavior that enhances quality of care for patients. And this model doesn't do any of that. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see litigation. It'll have to happen pretty quickly. We have to wait first to see what the final version of these models look like. What we have is the proposed version. The agency is going through the comment process. And so they've issued this proposed rule. Comments are due on February 23rd. The final version will be issued through regulation that should account for any concerns that are noted in those comments. But these models go into effect soon. The Part B model goes into effect Q4 of 2026. The Part D model goes into effect in January 2027. But keep in mind that the bids from Part D plans have to go in June. And my guess is that those Part D plans are going to want to know a little bit about this model before they submit those bids, which means we probably want to or expect to see a final rule by May. And so I think we'll certainly know by summertime if there are going to be legal challenges to it, and hopefully get an answer about whether those challenges are successful before those liabilities start to accrue.
If the executive branch doesn't have the legal authority here, who does? Is this a case of this is something Congress would have to do?
That's certainly one of the arguments I expect to hear, that that the statutory authority that the agency has to do experiments, which is what Affordable Care Act created this ability for CMS through the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Innovation, CMMI, to engage in experiments to see if on a trial basis there's a way of improving care or saving money and improving care. That's what this authority is supposed to encourage. The idea being that once you see what works, you could have Congress codify it in law. I think the arguments that we might hear are arguments around whether what CMS is doing here now is actually supported by the authority that they have. Does it go beyond the authority that Congress gave them to do experiments? And that along with that is, if this is going to be a change, it's something that Congress needs to do. It can't be something that CMS does on its own.
Even if they have the authority to conduct the experiment, the problem's just been kicked down the road if they want to make it into a permanent policy. If they want to actually, even if they claim that the experiment is a success, they will still need Congress to make it permanent policy.
I think that's right. I think the way it works, and it's a little murky in the statute, is the agency is supposed to start off on a test basis, and then they do have some authority to expand it beyond that phase one of the test. There is an expectation that there would be a phase two where they expand it further, but whether they can then make it permanent and all that, I agree, it likely would require a statutory change.
And of course, all that could be another election cycle away.
Right. And I think that's the other reason why we expect to see the final rule come out sooner rather than later, is this is a big issue for the midterms that we see the Trump administration really pushing. The president has very much been focused on MFN pricing across the board. And I expect that we'll see more of that with this being an important component of that strategy as we see the electioneering through the midterms.
Yeah, I mean, do you expect that this is going to get some significant airtime during the State of the Union?
That is a good question. We'll have to watch and wait, maybe come back and talk about that next time.
So that's CMS. Let's just put that on pause, at least for a minute. The other piece of the MFN is, of course, these negotiated deals. There have been quite a few of them now, not every company, but most of the big ones. Any more kind of concrete details have come out of that? Is it still a lot of kind of, we just know what they've announced, and that doesn't include a lot of details? And is there anything maybe telling about who hasn't come to the table with the administration yet?
There is nothing public out there. So we saw a flurry of additional deals announced actually shortly before Globe and Guard were announced in December. So we saw those last round of deals announced in December. Then we saw Globe and Guard get announced, I think on the 23rd or maybe the 19th, thereabout of December. But we really haven't seen much since then. The companies that announced those deals had their Oval Office moment, had press releases around them. But since then, nothing specific, nor have we seen any other deals. And it's unclear if there are other deals to be had, or if at this point the administration is just telling folks to go through the Globe Guard and generous models, if that's what they want to do. We just don't know based on what's publicly available.
So those two pieces don't fit together as well as you might expect, it sounds like. It's not like it's a two-pronged approach and you've got the deals and you've got the CMS models and they each have sort of a defined role towards implementing MFN. It's more like they're just doing both of these things. I mean, how would you characterize kind of the relationship there, if any?
So there is an interesting language. There's a statement that CMS has included in the Globe and Guard proposed rules that talk about how they reserve the right to exempt manufacturers from Globe and Guard for any reason, but then also potentially to the extent those manufacturers are otherwise engaged in other CMMI activities. And so that raises the question of if the manufacturer does the generous model, which is the Medicaid MFN, are they going to be exempt from the Medicare obligations because CMS has the discretion or has retained the discretion to do that? CMS wasn't explicit. I mean, there are other demonstration projects that are out there too that they could point to exempt a manufacturer from it. But that's the only potential link we've seen between those that's out there in the public sphere. The other thought I had as you asked that question, Jonah, is we also now have TrumpRx launched, which I know is something else you wanted to talk about. And now that TrumpRx is up and running and we can see which products are up there, It's possible that the administration is just using market forces to encourage manufacturers to put their products on the TrumpRx website, offering direct to patient pricing because they see who else is up there and has their products. And is there a competitor product on there? And if so, how do they get their product up there to compete as well? And that wasn't the case when these deals were being announced.
But when they announced the deals, they did always talk about TrumpRx and about how, these MFN prices are going to be the prices that are on TrumpRx. So there is some accountability there. We can look at what's been announced in these announcements and see if it's really being reflected on on the platform, right?
For sure, for sure. So you certainly could look at the drugs that are listed on TrumpRx and compare them to trace them back to the manufacturers that have signed deals to see which of their products are on there. You can see that now by just doing a simple search.
Now let's talk a little bit about TrumpRx. I think the last time you and I talked about it, we sort of talked about the possibility that it would be, more of a sort of navigator pointing to existing direct-to-patient platforms, rather than, something built up completely from scratch, especially considering the timetable they've built this on. Now that it's up, what are your impressions? How much of a difference do we see this making compared to other options?
It's interesting. I agree. Our understanding is that before we saw it, or at least mine, was that it was just going to be a navigator. But if you look at it now, it looks like it's a coupon. You put in the drug that you want, you tell them the drugs, the dosage form and strength and the like, and then you can print out a paper coupon and you can use it with any pharmacy that you go to. So that's the way it seems to be effectuated. And that's something that manufacturers have known how to do for a long time. Direct to patient coupon arrangements have been around for a long time. They're not hard to process, but that's what it looks like to me when I look at it, which is a little different. But the other reason that I think it's relevant, and this is another development, is the ESI consent decree that was announced. Because one of the terms of that consent decree is that through ESI's standard offerings, they have to require plans to allow patients to access the direct-to-consumer prices through TrumpRx and allow those expenditures to count towards patient out-of-pocket obligations for the year and their deductibles for the year, which is new. Now, there are some regulatory conditions that have to be satisfied before that is a requirement around best price and making sure that those sorts of deals would be out of best price. But I thought of that as an interesting linkage that now that we have these direct to patient prices that are MFN based. One of the concerns I always had is that's fine, but now patients just have to pay for this out of their own pocket. A lot of patients don't have the discretionary income to pay for, critical medications through their out of pocket. But if there's a pathway for requiring health plans to honor those expenditures and have them count towards patient out of pocket obligations without also impacting a manufacturer's best price, that would be a really interesting development.
Yeah, definitely. And to be clear, is that, do we know that now, or is that just sort of is TrumpRx as it exists kind of pointing us in that direction?
The consent decree has a provision in it that says that the ESI standard offerings needs to require this, assuming that the relevant statutory or regulatory changes needed to make sure that's out of best price occur. So there's a direct linkage in reference to TrumpRx in that consent decree.
Also looks like there's only 43 drugs on TrumpRx as of now. That's not a lot compared to how many drugs there are out there, right?
Yeah, I have not counted them, as you clearly have done very quickly. There's a way, it's interesting, you can put your email address in and get notified of updates so that if you want to know if other drugs are added, when they're added. Yeah, you're right. It's 43 drugs.
I don't want to ding them too much because it seems like the objective here has been to get this out quickly and then to continue improving it once it's out, which, as you say, the midterms are probably a factor there, but also, there's something admirable about wanting to get these benefits out there before maybe you have time to get everything in place, right?
Right. It's not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, but it's 43 drugs where it's unclear whether that price was accessible before.
Exactly.
So 43 is way better than 0.
Yeah. And I think, it might be fun as a journalist to kind of 43 is a manageable number. You could kind of dig in each one and see what the real lowest list price was and whether the website is kind of accurately reflecting that and all that stuff.
Sounds like a great project, Jonah.
Well, those were the 3 topics that I wanted to discuss, all kind of around the umbrella of MFN. But is there anything else that's been piquing your interest lately?
Well, I do want to see what happens with this consent decree and what that does to the PBM market. If we're going to see other consent decrees for others, I don't know, but it's still pretty new. It only came out maybe a couple weeks ago, so folks are still trying to understand what it means for formulary structure and benefit structure. So keeping an eye on that. The other topic that I'm spending a lot of time on that I think is also going to impact sort of the supply chain or market overall is this new requirement that manufacturers of Part B drugs get certifications from those that they pay service fees to, requiring that those channel providers typically, so wholesalers, distributors, pharmacies, GPOs, PBMs, that if they're getting this admin or service fee, that those service fees aren't passed on to third parties. Because if they are passed on or that vendor can't provide that certification, there's a new regulation that went into effect January 1st. It said manufacturers have to start treating those fees as discounts in ASP, which means that the Part B, that ASP and therefore the Part B payment rate for those drugs will go down. And that I'm watching that because I think it has the potential to impact channel economics. If wholesalers can't provide a certification that the distribution fees that they're charging manufacturers aren't passed on, that means manufacturers have to treat those things as discounts. All of a sudden, that I just think that changes the economic model of wholesalers and other channel. I'm just using them as an example of what those economics are with the manufacturers who are paying those fees. Those service providers don't have to provide the certifications, or those certifications don't have to be submitted until the end of April. So we're still seeing how that plays out, but I am keeping an eye on that and seeing how it changes potentially fee structures, and how they're determined and how they're structured, much like, the ESI consent decree also has some conditions in it around how PBM admin fees charged manufacturers have to be structured going forward. So I think that the supply chain for how drugs get from a manufacturer's loading dock to the patient's hands and how they're paid for over time, some of those compensation arrangements are going to be changing over the course of 2026.
Really, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, with something like that, when do you think when will that be shaken out? When will we know, some of those unknowns? Because it's all, like you say, it's all kind of, there are deadlines coming up.
So I don't know that we'll see anything publicly until we see the Part B payment rates for Q3, because the ASPs reported for Q1 determine the payment rate in Q3. If any of these fees need to be treated as price concessions, we'll see those for the first time in the Q1 ASPs. So I think if there's going to be an impact on the Part B side, we might see it in the payment rates for Q3. I don't know what we're going to see, how we're going to see it play out on the PBM side of things, until maybe we see what formulary structures look like going into 2027 based on, new structures in the market that address the FTC's concerns.
Well, good stuff, Alice. Thank you so much for catching me up, and our listeners as well. And yeah, we'll have to do this again soon.
You're welcome. Always a pleasure.
That concludes another episode of the Pharma Forum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments, at pharmaforum.com/podcast. The Pharma Forum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your podcasts. Just search for Pharma Forum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit the website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins, and follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at Pharma Forum. That's PharmaPhorum. That's all for now. Thanks for listening.